Dahlia Benson was 2 seconds from quitting when a man in a navy suit stepped off the elevator, holding a clipboard and looking like he actually gave a damn. "Finally," she said, brushing hair from her face, clearly frazzled. "You're the new event assistant, right? I need you to help me move the ice sculpture before it melts all over the stupid marble floor." The man blinked. "I'm sorry, don't apologize, just follow me." She turned on her heel, heels clicking furiously across the ballroom floor. The man hesitated for half a beat, then followed. The Grand Astoria Hotel was chaos. Tonight's charity gala for children's voices was being hosted by the elusive billionaire Evan Ashford, someone Dahlia had neither met nor seen, though she'd been coordinating this nightmare for 3 weeks. The original assistant had quit. The backup got food poisoning, and now Dahlia, freelance planner with a reputation for fixing disasters, was left juggling 1,000 things alone. She paused by the melting monstrosity of an ice swan. "Okay, grab that end. We'll just shift it 6 feet to the left, away from the draft." Evan stared at her. "You want me to move a 200-pound ice sculpture? Yes, you look like you go to the gym, or was that suit just for show?" He let out a low breath. "Fine." As they lifted, Dahlia grunted. "What's your name again?" "Evan." "Great. Evan, careful with your side. If this thing falls, I swear I'm locking myself in the wine cellar and pretending none of this ever happened." They set it down without catastrophe. Dahlia wiped her hands and looked up at him, finally getting a good look at his face. He was annoyingly handsome, clean-shaven, sharp jawline, dark eyes that looked like they saw too much and said too little. "Thanks," she said, grabbing a clipboard. "Okay, I need you to check the lighting setup by the stage while I figure out why there are 6 vegan entrees missing." Evan didn't move. "You really think I'm staff?" She frowned. "You're holding a clipboard. You're wearing a suit. You didn't say otherwise when I asked, so." "Yeah," he dropped his gaze, lips twitching. Noted. Before she could question that, her earpiece buzzed. "Dahlia, the florist's truck just got towed," she groaned. "Of course it did. Excuse me, Evan. If I don't find a way to replace $2,000 worth of peonies in the next hour, this entire event is going down in flames." He watched her rush off, then glanced down at the clipboard in his hand, his own notes for the speech he was supposed to give in front of 500 people tonight. So she thought he was staff. Interesting. And for the first time in months, Evan Ashford grinned. By the time the guests began arriving, the ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers. The ice sculpture was perfectly placed, and Dahlia was running on caffeine and sheer willpower. She spotted Evan again by the bar, now dressed in a tux, her brow furrowed. "Wait, where did you get changed?" He turned, sipping champagne. "I had a wardrobe upgrade." "You clean up well," she muttered. "Still need help with last-minute check-ins." He raised a brow. "I'm not actually staff," she laughed. "Right, you're a guest who willingly moved a giant ice bird." "Sure." He stepped closer. "I'm Evan Ashford," she blinked. "Evan wait, the Evan Ashford?" He gave a small nod, her eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God. I ordered the Billionaire hosting this gala to move an ice sculpture." "You did." "I yelled at you." "You did." "I told you to check the lighting like you were my intern." "That was my favorite part." Dahlia covered her face with both hands. "I'm going to die. I'm going to spontaneously combust from humiliation." "Don't," he said, gently pulling her hands down. "It was refreshing. No one's spoken to me like that in years." She stared at him. "You're not mad." "Mad," he chuckled. "I helped with the event, didn't I? And it turned out incredible." She swallowed. "Still, that was rude. I'm usually not. Don't apologize." He leaned in slightly. "Honestly, you were kind of amazing." She blinked. "I was bossy and brilliant." Her lips parted slightly. "You're really not mad?" "No," he said softly, eyes holding hers. "In fact, I was hoping you'd let me take you to dinner sometime." She blinked again, stunned. "Dinner?" "Yes, with no clipboards, no ice sculptures, and no mistaking me for staff." She flushed. "Why would a billionaire want to take someone like me to dinner?" He tilted his head. "Because you didn't care that I was a billionaire. You talked to me like I was just a guy." She hesitated. "I don't usually go out with clients." "I'm not hiring you," he said. "I'm asking you." Dahlia looked around the glittering ballroom. Everyone was watching him, and yet he was standing here asking her me, she thought, to dinner. Okay, she said finally, one dinner, but if you show up with a private jet and a 5-course menu, I'm out. His smile was slow and warm. Deal? The next night, he picked her up in a black SUV, not a limo, not a driver, and they went to a quiet little Italian place in Brooklyn where he ordered lasagna and red wine and asked her about the worst event disasters she'd ever handled. Dahlia found herself laughing more than she had in months. You really moved that ice sculpture, she said at one point, shaking her head. I really did, he said, and I'd do it again. She glanced at him. Why? He paused for half a second. Because when I saw you panicking, I wanted to help. She blinked at him. You didn't even know me. I know you now, he said, and somehow her heart did a stupid little flip. Dahlia stepped into her apartment, kicked off her heels, and leaned against the door, heart still racing. Dinner with Evan Ashford hadn't been what she'd expected. No velvet rope exclusivity. No waiters hovering. No subtle power plays. Just warm bread, a cozy table in a corner, and the kind of conversation that made her forget he was the kind of man who probably had a Forbes profile. And yet, when she'd laughed at his story about getting locked in a wine cellar during a New Year's Eve party at the Hamptons, she'd caught the flicker of something behind his eyes. Something quiet, like he was always waiting for someone to see past the polished surface. She dropped her purse on the kitchen counter and exhaled. What was she doing? She didn't date clients. She didn't date men so deeply entrenched in a world of wealth and privilege it barely touched reality. Her job was to make luxury look effortless, not to fall for the man who owned it. The next morning, she was waist-deep in spreadsheets and floral invoices when her assistant, Mira, poked her head into the office. There's a guy at the front desk, Mira said, wearing a gray coat, says he's here for you. Dahlia frowned. Did he give a name? No. But he handed me this. Mira passed her a black envelope with her name embossed in silver. Dahlia opened it, eyebrows lifting at the elegant, looping handwriting. Friday, 7:30, where something you can dance in, no signature, just a small embossed in the corner. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't agreed to another date. They hadn't even talked about seeing each other again. But there it was, a quiet invitation that didn't ask for permission or feign casual interest. It assumed she'd say yes, and that scared her more than she cared to admit. Friday arrived too fast. She told herself she should cancel. She had work, a huge wedding next week, a client flying in from Geneva. But when 7 o'clock came, she found herself in front of her mirror, brushing on mascara and muttering, "This is insane." The car that picked her up wasn't flashy. No gold trim, no chauffeur in white gloves. Just a sleek black vehicle with a driver who nodded politely and opened the door without a word. They drove past the city limits, away from the noise and into a quiet pocket of upstate New York she didn't recognize, until they pulled through a wrought iron gate and up a winding, lantern-lit drive. The estate that came into view was all glass and stone and warmth. Not ostentatious, just breathtaking. Like it had grown straight out of the landscape. Evan met her at the door wearing a navy dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar undone. You brought me to your house, she said, stepping inside. He nodded. Not for the reason you're thinking. Which is, you're going to laugh, try me. He gestured toward a hallway. I hired someone to teach me ballroom dancing. I thought I'd be terrible, so I asked if you'd come. She blinked. You want me to teach you to dance? No. I want to learn with you. She stared at him. Why? He hesitated. My sister's getting married in Italy next month. I'm giving a toast. There's a reception after. She told me I better not stand in a corner like a statue. Dahlia crossed her arms. You could have hired someone from a studio. I did, but it felt impersonal. You wanted me here. He didn't look away. Yes. The instructor, a woman in her 50s with a sharp bun and softer eyes, entered just then, saving Dahlia from having to respond. 2 hours later, her cheeks hurt from smiling. Again, the instructor said, clapping. 1, 2, step, spin. Dahlia turned, Evan's hand catching hers, his other resting lightly at her waist. He was terrible at keeping rhythm, but he never looked down at his feet. He just watched her like she was the only thing in the room worth focusing on. When the lesson ended, Evan walked her out onto the terrace. The night was quiet, broken only by the sound of distant crickets and wind through trees. I'm not good at this, he said, leaning on the railing. Dancing, showing people who I am without making them think I want something, she studied him. What do you want? He looked at her. Dahlia's breath caught, but she didn't look away. You barely know me, she said softly. I know how you didn't hesitate to take control when everything was falling apart. I know you refuse to let anyone see how much pressure you're under. I know you laugh when you're overwhelmed and you hate asking for help. Her arms folded across her chest. That doesn't mean you know me. You're right, he said, but I want to. She hesitated, then looked out over the hills. Why me? You could be with anyone, models, heiresses, women who wouldn't panic over melting ice or missing centerpieces. He straightened beside her. Because those women never made me move a sculpture without blinking. Because they never looked at me like I was just another person in the room. She didn't respond right away. I'm not used to men being honest, she said finally. I'm not used to people not faking it around me. Dahlia turned back to him. So what happens now? He stepped closer. You tell me if I get to see you again. She studied him, really studied him, the way he wasn't trying to impress her. The way he was just standing there, waiting for her answer without pushing. Maybe, she said. If you stop stepping on my feet. His grin lit up the dark. Deal. Dahlia stood at the edge of the rooftop garden, one hand wrapped around a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. Below, the city glimmered like a sea of stars. She wasn't sure how she'd ended up here again, another invitation, another evening where Evan Ashford pulled her into a world that felt like silk wrapped around steel. The benefit tonight was for a foundation that provided scholarships for underprivileged youth. She'd been surprised to find her name on the guest list. She hadn't planned on attending, but a handwritten note from Evan had arrived with a dress not flashy, but exquisitely tailored, in a deep sapphire that made her feel like she belonged. Not that she did. Your eyes are doing that thing again, Evan said, stepping beside her with 2 glasses of water instead of champagne, like you're calculating the odds of escape. I wasn't planning to stay long, she said, accepting the glass. You've said that before. Yet here you are. She sipped the water, then tilted her head. You always do that, he lifted a brow. Do what? Just appear like you knew exactly where I'd be standing. I've been looking for you since you walked in. A soft breath caught in her throat, but she didn't let it show. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She turned toward him, eyes narrowing. You always get what you want, don't you? Evan's expression didn't shift, but his voice dipped lower. No. I just stopped pretending I don't. Dahlia set her glass down on the ledge, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know how to do this. You mean date someone like me? No, she said, sharper than she meant. I mean be seen with someone like you. There are cameras in that corner, probably more on the terrace. If this turns into gossip column fodder, I lose clients. You're worried about your reputation. I'm worried about being a cautionary tale. Evan stepped closer. You think I'd let that happen? I think you could make it happen without meaning to, she said. You walk into a room and people look. I walk into a room and people ask if I'm with the caterers. His jaw tightened. If you think any of that matters to me, you don't know me at all. I don't, she said. Not really. He nodded once. Then ask, she blinked. What? If you want to know who I am, ask, she hesitated. Why don't you have a board seat in your own company? The muscles in his jaw shifted. My father stepped down 6 years ago. I refused to take the chair until I'd earned it. I wanted to know what it felt like to build something myself. And have you? Not yet, he said, but I'm getting close. Dahlia folded her arms. And what do you do when you're not hosting galas or being interviewed for magazines? He leaned against the railing, tone even. I go running before the city wakes up. I read biographies of people no one remembers. I take my niece to fencing practice. And I make a mean grilled cheese sandwich. Her lips twitched before she caught herself. Fencing? She's 7. She thinks she's a musketeer. A beat of silence passed before she spoke again. Why me, Evan? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her without explanation. She unfolded it slowly. It was a printout and email sent from her company's generic inbox. Her name was at the top. The subject line, Urgent Gala Disaster Plan. She scanned the message. It was her own words, written 3 weeks ago, frantically detailing backup plans, vendor replacements, and contingency strategies for the gala she'd saved. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I read it the night of the event," he said. "One of my staff forwarded it when the original coordinator bailed. They didn't tell you I saw it." Dahlia looked up. "Why would they?" "Because no one expected me to care, but I read every word, and I thought, who writes like this under pressure? Who stays this calm when everything's going wrong?" "I wasn't calm. You were brilliant," he said, "and that was before I knew what your voice sounded like." She folded the paper, fingers trembling slightly. "That doesn't mean this isn't a bad idea." "You're allowed to walk away," he said. "But don't pretend you don't feel it, too." She didn't answer. Just then, someone called Evan's name from across the garden, a man in his 50s, flanked by 2 others in tailored suits. Evan didn't take his eyes off her. "I have to speak with them." "Will you stay?" "I don't belong here." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. 5 minutes. He nodded once and walked away. Dahlia turned back to the skyline, heart hammering. She didn't want to fall for a man who could leave her behind without blinking. But he hadn't blinked when she'd yelled at him. He hadn't blinked when she'd told him she didn't trust this. He hadn't blinked when she'd challenged every part of his life, and that terrified her more than anything else. She was still standing there when he returned 10 minutes later. He didn't ask if she was okay, he just held out his hand and said, "Come with me." She didn't ask where, she didn't need to, she took his hand and followed. Dahlia stood in the center of the glass conservatory, surrounded by fragrant white blossoms that reached toward the curved ceiling like something out of a dream. Soft light from a chandelier above shimmered across the marble floor. Outside, a quiet garden stretched into twilight, but inside, time seemed to pause. "How did you even find this place?" she asked, voice low. Evan loosened the cuffs of his shirt and stepped beside her. "I used to come here with my mother. It's closed to the public now." "I made a few calls." She turned slowly in place. "You rented out an entire botanical estate." "I didn't rent it," he said gently. "I own it." She turned toward him, eyes narrowing. "Why bring me here? You've been running from everything you feel," he said, voice even. "I wanted to give you a place where you could stop." Dahlia didn't speak right away. She walked past a cluster of orchids, her heels echoing softly. "You don't understand what it costs me to be seen with you." "Then tell me." She faced him. "You think I'm afraid of gossip or being caught in the background of some photo. I'm not. I'm afraid of how fast this is moving, of how easily you make me forget the ground under my feet." Evan stepped closer, not touching her. "I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who want things. Money. Access, power. You didn't want any of that from me. You just wanted me to move a sculpture." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You keep bringing that up." "It's the moment I realized you were different." Dahlia looked down, fingers twisting the ring on her right hand. "I've worked for everything I have. Every client, every contract. I don't get to make mistakes. I don't get to be reckless." "You're not being reckless," he said. "You're being brave." She met his gaze again, and something in her chest cracked open. "I don't want to be someone you remember for a few weeks," she said quietly. "I don't want to be a story you tell at some dinner about the time you dated a girl who yelled at you in a ballroom." "I don't want a story," Evan said. "I want a life." She blinked, startled by the certainty in his voice. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath hitched. "I'm not proposing," he said, voice steady. "Not yet. I'm giving you this because I need you to understand something." He opened the box to reveal a key, not ornate, not symbolic, just a simple silver key. "To what?" she asked. "My office, my penthouse, my life," he said. "You won't use it today, maybe not tomorrow. But when you're ready, I want you to know the door's open." Dahlia stared at the key, unable to speak. "I'm not asking you to promise anything," Evan continued. "Just to stop pretending this isn't real." She stepped back, and for a moment he thought she might leave. But then she reached out and took the key, holding it in both hands like it might burn her fingers. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just don't give it back." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You terrify me." "I terrify myself," he said, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw the vulnerability beneath the steel. Silence fell between them, thick with everything unspoken. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with all the things they hadn't had words for. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "but this has to be mine too, not just part of your world, ours." Evan nodded. "Then let's build something together." She tucked the key into her clutch. "Starting when?" He offered his hand. "Now." She took it. 2 months later, the wedding she'd been planning for a celebrity chef and his Broadway star bride went off without a hitch. Dahlia stood in the wings of the ballroom, clipboard in hand, calm for the first time in her career. She turned toward the man now standing at her side, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, holding a tray of champagne flutes he'd been helping pass around after a server slipped. "You really know how to make a callback," she said, arching a brow. "Just wanted to see if you'd boss me around again." "I might. I'm counting on it." As the crowd erupted in cheers for the newlyweds, Evan leaned down and whispered, "Let's get out of here." She glanced at her assistant, who nodded and waved her off. Outside, a vintage convertible waited at the curb. Evan opened the door for her and she slid in, laughing as he tossed the tray into the back seat and started the engine. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Someplace nobody knows our names." As they pulled onto the road, wind in her hair, the city stretching behind them like a memory, Dahlia reached into her clutch and touched the key. She wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't a world she'd stumbled into or borrowed for a night. It was hers. And so was he. The door to the penthouse clicked shut behind Dahlia as she stepped inside, her heels quiet against the polished hardwood floors. Rain misted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurred into gold and silver beyond the glass. Evan stood by the fireplace, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows of his crisp white shirt. He looked up when he heard her enter, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "What happened?" Dahlia asked, setting her bag on a nearby chair. "They want me to take the seat," he said, his voice low. "Chairman of the board, officially," she swallowed. "And I told them I'd think about it." He crossed the room slowly, his expression unreadable. "Why aren't you celebrating?" she asked. "Because I only want it if I can do it on my terms." He stopped in front of her. "And because I don't want it to change what we've built." Dahlia raised her chin. "You think it will?" "I've watched that role destroy people's personal lives. It demands everything. And I've given enough of myself to rooms full of suits who never see past the name." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "So don't become them." "You're the only thing that makes me sure I won't," he exhaled quietly. "But I need to know we're in the same place. I'm not looking for a man who can promise me he'll always be home by 7, she said. "I'm looking for someone who shows up when it matters, and you do." His eyes softened. "You still have that key," she nodded and pulled it from her coat pocket. "Every day, front pocket, just in case." He closed his hand gently around hers. "Then come with me to Florence." Dahlia blinked. "What?" "My sister's wedding. I want you there." "I thought you were going alone." "I was. But then I realized the person I want standing beside me, the person who calms the chaos, is you." She hesitated, then smiled. "I'll need to rearrange a client consultation, but yes, I'll be there." Florence was drenched in late spring warmth and soft gold light. The villa where the wedding took place overlooked the Arno Valley, surrounded by olive trees and rows of lavender. Dahlia wore a pale green dress that caught every breeze, her hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. Evan hadn't let go of her hand all day. After the ceremony, when music swelled beneath string lights and champagne flutes clinked on linen-draped tables, Evan led her away from the crowd and onto a terrace overlooking the countryside. The sun had just dipped below the hills, casting the sky in shades of apricot and violet. "I told my sister about you," he said. Dahlia leaned into him. "What did you say?" "That you're the reason I stopped pretending I was fine being alone." She tilted her head. "And what did she say?" She said, "It's about time." They both laughed, and the moment stretched into something quieter, something deeper. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her fingers laced with his. "All the time," he said. "My lease on the penthouse is up in 2 months. I've been thinking about starting over, someplace that doesn't come with a boardroom attached." She looked up at him, heart thudding. "Wherever you are. That's not an address." He turned toward her, slipping one hand under her chin. Then how about this? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in a platinum band. Dahlia froze. Evan, I'm not asking you to marry me today, he said gently, but I am saying I want that to be part of our story. When you're ready, she stared at him, her eyes shining. You're serious, more than I've ever been. She didn't hesitate. She reached for the ring and slipped it onto her right hand. I'm not ready for the aisle, she said, but I'm not going anywhere. His lips brushed hers, soft and certain. Good, because I've already told the florist you're a non-negotiable guest list addition. She laughed against his mouth, and he wrapped his arms around her, grounding her in a way that made the whole world feel still. 6 months later, they stood in the foyer of the new home they'd chosen together, a townhouse tucked between the West Village and the river, with ivy crawling up the brick and a tiny garden in the back. Dahlia had opened her own boutique planning firm on the ground floor. Evan had taken a step back from public life, investing in education programs and quietly mentoring young entrepreneurs. They spent mornings making coffee in bare feet and evenings wrapped in blankets on the rooftop, watching the skyline flicker to life. One afternoon, as Dahlia sorted through invitation designs for a client, Evan stepped into her office. "Remember the key I gave you?" he asked. She looked up. "Of course. I had a new one made." He held it out, a gold key with a tiny engraved D on one side and an E on the other. "What's this one for?" "The front door," he said. "Of our life." She took it, tears catching behind her eyes. "I already have that. Now it's official." They didn't need a ceremony to prove what they already knew, that they'd built something real, something lasting. Not a whirlwind or a fling, but a life they'd chosen, every day, piece by piece. And in the quiet moments when the world faded and it was just them, no headlines, no chaos, no expectations, they knew the truth. They had found what people spent lifetimes chasing, and they were never letting go.